They chuckled while scanning her DNA. The room went silent when Apex Predator appeared on screen. The walk from the registration bay to the Union's diplomatic reception hall took about 15 minutes on foot. It went through 2 transit corridors, a wide observation deck that looked out onto the docking level below, and a long connecting bridge with tall transparent walls that showed open space on both sides, black and deep and scattered with the pale points of distant stars. The 3 of them walked it together, Yuna in the middle, Taeho on her left, Dohyun on her right. Their footsteps were quiet on the floor. Around them, other beings moved through the same corridors: staff, delegates, maintenance crews, arriving visitors. The station was always busy. There was always something happening, always somewhere to be. No one they passed knew what had just occurred in the registration bay. No one looked at them twice. Yuna was quiet for most of the walk. She usually was. She was not a person who filled silence with words when silence was working well enough. But somewhere on the observation deck, pausing for a moment to look down at the docking level below, the ships lined up in their berths, the small figures moving between them, she said, "You explained it well." Dohyun glanced at her. "I've had practice." "Has it happened before?" she asked. "The scan? The classification?" "Twice," Taeho said from her other side. His voice was even. "Once at the Meridian Station, about 8 years ago. The technician running that scan actually left the room when the result came up. Just walked out. His supervisor had to complete the filing." He paused. "And once at the Outer Reach checkpoint 4 years back. That time the system flagged an error and refused to accept the input. Took 3 hours to manually override it." Yuna considered this. "And now here. Although this one went better than either of the others, I think. Because Dohyun talked to them." "Because Dohyun talked to them," Taeho agreed. Dohyun said nothing, which was his way of accepting a compliment without drawing attention to it. They reached the reception hall and went through the formal check-in process, which was brief and completely unremarkable. No scanners, no flags, just paperwork and signatures, and a staff member directing them to a waiting area with low seats and a view of a courtyard filled with plants from a dozen different worlds. Yuna sat down. Taeho stood nearby. Dohyun went to speak to someone at the front desk about the schedule for the afternoon's meetings. While he was gone, Taeho sat down in the seat beside Yuna and looked at the courtyard for a while without speaking. The plants were strange and interesting. Some moved slightly without any wind, responding to some internal rhythm. Some had colors that had no name in any human language. It was the kind of thing that, after 11 years of this work, still caught his eye. He was grateful for that. He did not ever want to stop noticing things like that. "Can I ask you something?" Yuna said. "Yes." "When we were in the bay, before the result came up," she looked at her hands, "you already knew what it was going to say." It was not quite a question. Taeho looked at her. "I had a reasonable expectation," he said. "How long have you known? About the classification? About what a full scan would find?" Taeho was quiet for a moment. "The biology has been documented internally for about 20 years, he said. The classification itself, the Tier 0 assessment, was done by a private research team that petitioned the Union for a full biological review about 12 years ago. The Union conducted it. The result was filed in a restricted archive. It wasn't widely shared. There were people who thought releasing it publicly would cause problems." "What kind of problems?" Taeho looked at the courtyard. One of the plants had begun to close its large pale petals slowly, folding inward in a way that looked almost like something breathing. The kind where other species start thinking very carefully about whether they want humanity in the same rooms as them, signing the same treaties, sitting at the same tables. He turned to look at Yuna. "Tier 0 is not just a biological data point. It changes the way people think about you. Sometimes that's useful. Sometimes it makes things much more complicated." "But it's the truth," Yuna said. "It is," Taeho said, and that's why it always comes out eventually. Do-hyun returned from the front desk and sat down across from them. He had the afternoon's meeting schedule on his datapad and was already reviewing it with the focused expression of someone getting ready to do their actual job. Whatever had happened in the registration bay was now, for him, in the past, noted, complete, filed away. This was how he worked. It was part of why he was good at it. The Valhari delegation has requested an amendment to today's session, he said, not looking up. Taeho raised an eyebrow. What kind of amendment? They have withdrawn their prior motion. Do-hyun turned the datapad so the others could see the notification on the screen. The one that classified humanity as a protected primitive species eligible for supervised resource access. He set the datapad on his knee. They've formally retracted it. The amendment has been logged with the Union Secretary's office. There was a short silence. That was fast, Yuna said. Vreth filed it from the registration console, Do-hyun said. About 7 minutes after we left. I received the notification on the way to the front desk. Taeho looked at the ceiling briefly. 7 minutes. 7 minutes, Do-hyun confirmed. He picked his datapad back up. The session agenda will need to be revised. The protected species motion was the second item on the list. Without it, we move straight to the resource access treaty discussion, which is what we actually came here for. He scrolled through the schedule. I think that works in our favor. I think so too, Taeho said. Yuna said nothing. She was looking at the courtyard again, at the folding plant with its pale petals and its slow internal rhythm. She was thinking, in the quiet way she usually thought, about the morning, about the blue light, and the laughter, and the 4 Valhari technicians who had stopped laughing before she had said a single word. About the red text on the big screen. About the specific shape of the silence that had followed it. She was not thinking about it with pride. Pride was not quite the right word for what she felt. It was something else, something more complicated and less comfortable. Something that sat alongside gratitude and responsibility, and a steady, low awareness of weight. The weight of what the scanner had read, the weight of what it meant, the weight of carrying something that large inside something that looked so ordinary. She thought about what Do-hyun had said to Vreth at the end, about capability and choice, about the long distance between what a species could do and what it decided to do. She thought he had said it well, and she thought it was true, and she thought that truth required more from her than a scan result ever could. Outside the reception hall, beyond the walls of the station, the star map in the Union's navigation system had been updated that morning with a routine administrative change, the kind that happened dozens of times a day without anyone noticing. Earth's marker had been moved, not far, just from one section of the map to another, out of the column labeled Emerging and Developing Civilizations, and into the column that had 6 other entries in it, all of them documented, all of them known, all of them regarded by the rest of the galaxy with a form of careful, deeply considered respect. It was a small change on a large map, one blue dot moving a short distance across a screen. But on that map, in that column, next to those 6 other names, it meant something very specific. It meant that the galaxy had looked carefully at humanity and had found, at last, the correct word for what it was looking at. Taeho leaned back in his seat and looked at the courtyard. The folding plant had opened its petals again. It was slower than before, a long, deliberate unfolding, pale and quiet and completely unbothered by anything around it. "How do you think the treaty talks will go?" Yuna asked. Do-hyun considered for a moment. "Better than they would have this morning," he said. Taeho smiled. It was a small smile, and he did not make any comment. He had spent 11 years standing in rooms and watching. He had watched from the outside of things for a very long time. He knew what this morning had been. He knew what it would become once word moved through the diplomatic channels the way word always moved, quietly and then all at once, he knew that the Velhari were not the last ones who would need the explanation Do-hyun had given. He knew there would be more rooms, more scanners, more silence after red text on large screens. He knew the conversation would happen again and again, in different corners of the galaxy, in different languages, in front of different sets of eyes. And every time it did, the answer would be the same. The same data, the same history, the same truth about a small, ordinary-looking species from a world that had tried, repeatedly and creatively, to end them, and had failed, and had produced, in failing, the specific kind of life that stands quietly on a platform, with folded hands and a calm face, and waits without fear for whatever the machine is going to say. Because it already knows. It has always known. They chuckled while scanning her DNA. The room went silent when Apex Predator appeared on screen. Do-hyun had not moved from his spot by the wall, but everything about his posture had shifted. He was no longer the patient man waiting quietly with a datapad under his arm. He was standing differently now, forward, attentive, with the focused stillness of someone who has recognized the exact moment when their job becomes necessary. He waited until Yuna had stepped off the platform and walked halfway across the floor toward them. Then he turned and looked at Vreth. Vreth was still at the console. He had not moved far from it since the classification appeared on the screen. He was going through the motions of updating the registration file with the mechanical focus of someone who needed something to do with their hands. But his eyes kept going back to the screen, to the red text, to the two words that had changed the entire character of the last 10 minutes. Do-hyun walked toward the console. He walked at an ordinary pace, without urgency, the way diplomats walk when they want the other party to understand that nothing about the situation is being treated as a crisis. He stopped a respectful distance from the console and waited until Vreth looked up. "I imagine you have questions," Do-hyun said. His voice was mild. It was not the voice of someone who had just won something. It was the voice of someone who was about to be helpful. Vreth looked at him for a moment. Then, with what appeared to be genuine effort, he composed himself. He was a professional. He was not going to let a registration result unmake 14 years of professional composure. He straightened, folded two of his forearms across his torso in a Velhari gesture of formal readiness, and said, "The classification is unusual. I would like to understand it." "Of course," Do-hyun said. He set his datapad on the edge of the console and folded his hands over it. "What would you like to know first?" Vreth gestured toward the screen. Class 3 was the registered baseline for your species. That classification has been on record for 60 years. This result contradicts it entirely. Either your previous registration was wrong, or this scan has made an error. "The previous registration wasn't wrong," Do-hyun said. "It was incomplete. There's a difference." He paused to let that settle before continuing. When humans were first assessed 60 years ago, the survey team spent approximately 4 months on Earth. They observed behavior, collected surface biological samples, conducted interviews through early translation systems. They saw what you see when you look at us: small, social, moderately intelligent, not physically imposing. Class 3 seemed reasonable. The team filed their report and moved on, and the deeper biological data was never requested, Do-hyun said simply, because nothing about our surface appearance suggested it was necessary. A Class 3 species doesn't typically warrant a deep evolutionary scan. Standard procedure. He tilted his head slightly. Today was the first time a Union scanner ran a full-depth assessment on a human being. Vreth was quiet for a moment. "And the result is Tier 0. "Yes. That classification," Vreth said carefully, "requires a very specific biological profile. It is not simply about physical capability. It is about evolutionary origin. It is about what an organism was shaped by." "That's correct," Do-hyun said. And that's the part that most species miss when they look at us. He glanced toward Yuna, who had reached Tejo and was standing with him near the wall, speaking quietly. "Can I tell you something about where we come from?" Vreth gestured with one hand, a Velhari signal for permission. Dohyun took a breath and began. "Earth is not a gentle world," he said. "It never has been. For most of our evolutionary history, we were not the largest thing on our planet. We were not the fastest. We were not the strongest. We did not have natural armor, or venom, or biological weapons of any kind that you could point to and call dangerous. What we had was a body that refused to quit, and a mind that refused to stop solving problems, and neither of those things looked impressive from the outside." He paused. Vreth had gone still, all four arms at rest, both sets of eyes on Dohyun. "The predators on our world were enormous," Dohyun continued. "They had been evolving alongside us for millions of years, and every generation of them that survived was a generation that had learned to kill things like us. So every generation of us that survived was a generation that had found a way to survive things like them. That pressure, that ongoing, relentless, never-ending pressure from every direction, is what built the biology your scanner just read. The bone density," Vreth said, "built for impact, for falling, for being hit, and getting back up." Dohyun nodded. "The muscle fiber structure, built for long pursuit. We are persistence hunters. We don't run faster than our prey, we run longer. We can maintain physical output for hours. Most prey animals overheat or collapse long before a human does. We simply follow them. We wait. We outlast." Vreth's colleague had drifted closer, without appearing to notice he was doing it. The other two technicians were also listening. The console had been mostly forgotten. "The immune system," Vreth said. "Our world tried to kill us in every way available," Dohyun said. "When it couldn't do it with predators, it tried disease. When disease didn't work, it tried climate change, resource scarcity, natural disasters. Our immune system is what it is because it had to keep up with all of that simultaneously for millions of years. It adapted in real time or it died. The ones that died didn't pass on their biology. The ones that adapted did." He spread his hands in a small, open gesture. "That's all evolution is. The ones that survived, survived, and they were very good at it." "The pain suppression," Vreth said quietly. He said it the way someone names a thing they have been thinking about since they first read it on the screen. Dohyun was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was still mild, but it had a slightly different quality. The quality of something being said with full awareness of its weight. "There is a documented account," he said, "of a human soldier in an early war on our planet, who sustained injuries that should have ended his ability to function within minutes. He continued fighting for 2 more hours. Afterwards, when asked how he kept going, he said he simply had not finished yet." Dohyun looked at Vreth steadily. "That is not unusual in our history. That is not a rare exception. That is a thing that appears in our records with enough regularity that we stopped finding it remarkable." The registration hall continued its noise around them. The rest of the world went on. But in this small corner of it, near a scanning platform where the blue light had faded and the red text still sat on the screen, a group of Velhari technicians stood very still and listened to a human man explain, in a calm and reasonable voice, exactly what their scanner had found. "Then why," Vreth said after a pause, "are you Class 3 in the registry? How was this not known?" "Because we look like this," Dohyun said. He gestured toward himself, his ordinary height, his ordinary build, his plain face. "We look like a Class 3 species. And we behave, most of the time, like one. We are cooperative. We are social. We prefer talking to fighting. We would rather make a friend than make an enemy. None of those things look like Tier 0 on the surface." He picked up his datapad. The assessment team 60 years ago looked at our behavior and made a reasonable conclusion. They just didn't look deep enough to find out what the behavior was sitting on top of. Yuna had walked back toward them while Dohun was speaking. She stopped a few steps away and stood quietly. Vreth looked at her. She looked back. There was no challenge in her expression, no performance. She was just standing there, small and calm and ordinary-looking, in her gray uniform with the earth patch on the shoulder. "There is one more thing," Dohun said, drawing Vreth's attention back. "The classification, Tier 0, it describes what we are biologically, what we are shaped by, what our bodies were built to do. But it doesn't describe what we chose. We chose to come here. We chose to join. We chose to ask for a place in the Union rather than take one." He looked at Vreth without any edge in his voice. "We have been capable of a great many things for a very long time. What we are, as a civilization, is what we decided to do with that capability." Vreth stood in silence for a long moment. He looked at the screen once more. He looked at Yuna. He looked at Dohyun. Then he did something that none of his colleagues had ever seen him do at a registration console in 14 years of working together. He inclined his head, slowly, deliberately, with all 4 arms lowering to his sides. It was a Velhari gesture. It meant something close to, "I was wrong, and I acknowledge it." Dohyun received it with a small nod of his own. Taeho, standing by the wall with his arms folded, watched all of it. He said nothing. He did not need to. They chuckled while scanning her DNA. The room went silent when Apex Predator appeared on screen. The secondary confirmation scan ran for 2 more minutes. It was thorough. It went deeper than the first pass, pulling at genetic layers that standard registration scans never touched. The kind of deep biological record that told the story of a species across millions of years, not just its current form. It read the history, written in the bones and blood and nerves, of the small, quiet woman standing on the platform. It read the story of every generation that had come before her. Every adaptation, every survival, every narrow escape from extinction that had added one more layer to what she was. When it finished, the console was silent for 3 full seconds. Then, it displayed its result. The main screen above the scanning platform was large, designed to be visible from a distance, so that multiple staff members could read registration data at once. It showed everything in universal script, the standardized written language used across all Union facilities. Green text for standard data, yellow for minor flags, orange for significant anomalies. Red was reserved for the classifications at the top of the scale. The text appeared letter by letter, the way the system always rendered its final classification, steady and unhurried, as though the machine itself understood the weight of what it was saying. Final classification, Apex Predator, Tier 0. The laughter had already stopped a long time ago. But whatever quiet, low-level conversation and movement had been continuing among the Velhari technicians, the small professional sounds of people doing their work, that stopped too. At once. The way sound stops when something very large and very unexpected steps into a room. Vreth did not move. He stood in front of the console, with all 4 of his hands resting flat on the edge of the desk, and stared at the red text on the screen. His colleagues stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. The other 2 technicians, who had drifted to either side during the scan, had both gone completely still. Tier 0. In the Galactic Union's biological classification system, most species that passed through registration fell somewhere between Class 1 and Class 8. Class 1 was reserved for organisms with no meaningful capacity for harm, bacteria, simple creatures, passive life forms. Class 8 covered large, dangerous predators that required special travel documentation. The vast majority of species, including most of the Union's member worlds, registered between Class 3 and Class 6. It was a wide, comfortable range that covered everything from cooperative herbivores to intelligent tool users, to moderately aggressive hunters. Tier 0 was not part of that range. It was not on the same scale. It was a separate classification entirely, one that had been added to the Union system 200 years ago, after a biological survey team encountered a species in the Outer Rim that the existing scale simply could not describe. Tier 0 did not mean dangerous in the ordinary sense. It did not mean aggressive, or large, or physically powerful in any single way that could be pointed to and measured. It meant something more specific and more unsettling. It meant that the biology of the organism had been shaped, across its entire evolutionary history, by the experience of being at the top of everything. No natural predators, no evolutionary pressure that had not been overcome, a body and a mind that had been built generation by generation, by surviving things that should not have been survivable, and then going back for more. 6 species in the Union's entire recorded history had earned that classification. 2 of them were extinct. 1 had never achieved spaceflight and remained on its home world under quiet observation. 2 others were known, documented, and treated with the kind of careful, formal respect that was really just a well-dressed version of fear. The 6th was humanity. Except humanity had been registered as Class 3. Vreth turned very slowly from the screen and looked at Yuna. She was already looking at him. She had turned her head at the sound, or the sudden lack of sound, with the calm, alert attention of something that notices when the environment changes. Her brown eyes moved from Vreth to the screen and back again. Her expression did not change. There was no surprise in it. No particular emotion that could be named easily. She looked at the red text on the screen for a moment, the way a person looks at a thing they already knew was there, and then she looked back at Vreth. She gave him a very small, very polite smile. Vreth's lower set of eyes blinked. His upper set did not. Near the wall, Teho let out a breath through his nose. It was quiet and slow and controlled. He kept his face still. He kept his arms folded. But the set of his shoulders changed, just slightly. Something in the tension there released, like a knot coming loose after a long time. And anyone paying close attention might have noticed that the corners of his mouth moved, just barely, in a direction that was not quite a smile, but was the shape that came just before one. Do-hyun had put his datapad down. He was watching Vreth. He was watching the way the information was settling into the room, the way cold water settles into a space, slow, total, reaching every corner. He had his own expression, the one that meant he was already thinking 3 steps ahead, already planning what he would say, already arranging words in the careful way that diplomats arrange furniture, for maximum effect and minimum damage. He let the silence go on for a moment longer. Silences like this one were useful. They did their own work. One of the technicians at the far end of the console made a quiet sound and reached toward the screen, as if to check that the display was rendering correctly. It was a reflex. The same thing Vreth had done when he ran the secondary confirmation. The instinct to find a simpler explanation, the hope that the machine had made an error. He ran the diagnostic. The screen confirmed that the display was functioning perfectly. The classification was correct. Tier 0. He took his hand back. The noise of the wider registration hall continued around them. The sounds of 100 other arrivals, 100 other scans, 100 other species moving through the ordinary business of intergalactic registration. None of them knew. None of them had looked over. It was a private moment, contained within a small circle of blue scanning light and red text on a large screen, and the 4 Velhari technicians standing in front of it. Vreth turned back to look at Yuna one more time. He was a careful, intelligent being. He had run registration scans for 14 years. He had seen thousands of species. He had developed over that time a very reliable instinct for what a species was based on appearance, movement, behavior. He was rarely wrong. He was looking at that instinct now from the other side of it, and finding it much smaller than he had thought. The small human woman on the platform stood at average height, with average build, with quiet eyes and folded hands, and a face that showed nothing remarkable at all. She looked, to every visual sense he possessed, like exactly what he had assumed she was when she first stepped up to the scanner. Soft, small, harmless, something to process quickly and move on from. The screen above her head said otherwise. The screen above her head said that the quiet, still, politely smiling woman in the gray uniform was, biologically and evolutionarily, one of the 6 most dangerous categories of organism the Galactic Union had ever formally acknowledged. Vreth was a scientist. He trusted data over instinct. That was a principle he had held his whole career. Right now, holding it required more effort than usual. He pulled up the registration form on his secondary console with hands that moved a little more carefully than before. Not rushed, not shaking, just careful, and began entering the updated classification into Yuna's file. He changed the field that said Class 3. He typed in Tier 0. The system asked him to confirm. He confirmed. He did not look at his colleagues while he did it. He did not make any sounds. The clicking, easy conversation that had filled the scanning station since the beginning of the shift was gone, and Vreth had the specific feeling that it would not be coming back today. The blue light around Yuna faded as the scan officially completed. The platform chimed once, a soft, standard tone that meant the process was finished, and the subject was free to go. Yuna unfolded her hands. She stepped down from the platform with the same unhurried, calm movement she had used to step up onto it. She picked up her small bag from the floor beside the platform where she had set it before the scan. She looked at Vreth one more time. Then she walked across the hall toward Teho and Dojin, her footsteps quiet and even on the polished floor. Behind her, not a single one of the 4 Velhari technicians spoke. They chuckled while scanning her DNA. The room went silent when Apex Predator appeared on screen. The blue light did not stop. It held around Yuna like a slow-breathing thing, pulsing faintly at intervals, reaching deeper into her biology than the standard scan ever needed to go. The equipment was not malfunctioning. Every indicator on Vreth's console shone green. The machine was simply doing what it was built to do, reading, recording, classifying, and what it was finding was making it work harder than it had in a very long time. Vreth leaned closer to the screen. His lower pair of eyes had not left the data since the second minute. His upper pair kept flicking between the console and the small human woman standing quietly on the platform, as if trying to reconcile the two things. The data said one thing, his eyes said another. The conflict between them was making his hands move faster over the console keys, pulling up sub-readings, requesting secondary confirmations, cross-referencing against the Union's general registry. The first flag had appeared at the 2-minute mark. It was a small one, a notation in the genetic record about bone density. Human bones, the scanner noted, were significantly denser than the galactic average for a species of comparable size and body mass. Not a little denser, considerably denser. The kind of density more commonly found in species that had evolved under heavy gravity, or species that had spent millions of years being hit very hard by very large things and surviving it. Vreth had dismissed it at first. Outliers happened. Individual variation was common across all species. He had marked it as a minor anomaly and moved on. Then the second flag appeared. The scanner was reading layers of it, not the simple, uniform fiber structure found in most mid-level species, but a complex interwoven arrangement of fast-twitch and slow-twitch fibers that sat side by side in an unusually dense configuration. The result was a body that could move explosively for short bursts, and then sustain that movement for long periods without the kind of systemic shutdown that most species experienced after peak physical output. It was, the scanner noted in flat clinical language, an extremely efficient design for a pursued predator. Vret's colleague, the one who had been laughing loudest earlier, was now standing beside him in complete silence, reading over his shoulder. The third flag was the immune system. Vreth had seen complex immune systems before. Several Union species had evolved in environments with heavy pathogen loads and had developed multi-layered biological defenses as a result. But the human immune system was something different. It was not just defensive, it was adaptive in real time, capable of identifying, cataloging, and building countermeasures against new threats within the same generation, sometimes within the same individual lifespan. The scanner flagged it with a term that was rarely used outside of top-tier species assessments: dynamic biological weaponry. One of the other technicians at the far end of the console made a low sound. Not a laugh this time, something quieter. Tejo, standing by the wall with his arms folded, watched all four Velhari technicians gradually converge on the main console. He did not move. He did not say anything. He had a view of the screen from where he stood, though he could not read the data clearly from that distance. He did not need to. He could read the room well enough. Dovyun had also stopped looking at his datapad. He was watching now. His expression carefully neutral, the way it always was when he was paying very close attention. On the platform, Yuna had not moved. She stood exactly as she had stood at the beginning, hands folded, feet together, eyes forward. The blue light moved around her with the quiet patience of something that had a lot of work left to do. She had been told the scan would take 90 seconds. It had now been over 4 minutes. She had not asked any questions. She had not shifted her weight, or looked at the console or tried to see what was on the screen. She simply waited. This, too, was a human thing, this capacity for stillness under observation. The scanner did not measure it, but Vreth was noticing it anyway. Most species showed some physical sign of discomfort during extended scans: elevated heart rates, small involuntary movements, the natural restlessness of a living thing being examined by a machine for longer than expected. The human woman showed almost none of it. Her heart rate, which the scanner was tracking continuously, had risen slightly when she first stepped onto the platform, a small, controlled response, and had then come back down and stayed there. It was the heart rate of someone who had assessed the situation, found no immediate threat, and filed it away. The fourth flag stopped Vreth completely. Pain tolerance and neurological response thresholds. The scanner could not directly test pain tolerance in a passive scan, but it could read the neurological architecture, the way the brain and body were wired to process and respond to pain signals. What it found in Yuna's scan was a system that had been built, over millions of years of evolution, to receive pain signals, process them quickly, and then continue functioning without shutting down. The body had numerous biological mechanisms specifically designed to override pain responses during periods of high physical stress. Adrenaline systems that were more powerful than galactic average. Endorphin production that could sustain function through injuries that would incapacitate most comparable species. A neurological pain gate that could, under certain conditions, essentially mute incoming pain signals long enough for the organism to finish what it was doing. The scanner used a word Vreth recognized. He had seen it exactly twice in his career. Once on the profile of a Korath warbeast, a 6-ton apex hunter from the Outer Rim, and once on a deep-sea creature from a water world near the galactic core that had no natural predators in its entire ocean. The word was suppression capable. Vreth straightened up slowly. He looked at his colleague. Neither of them said anything. The fifth flag was still loading. It was taking longer than the others, because the scanner was cross-referencing against older records, pulling data from the Union's deep archive, the one that stored biological profiles from species assessments going back 200 years. It was searching for matches. It was trying to find something in its database that was comparable to what it was reading in the human woman on the platform. Something it could anchor the data to. Some known quantity it could use as a reference point. It was not finding many. Taeho watched Vreth turn away from the console and look at Yuna directly for the first time since the scan had begun. Not the casual, dismissive glance from earlier. A real look. Long and careful, and very different in quality from anything that had come before it. The laughter was gone from his posture entirely. The easy confidence was gone. What had replaced it was something that Taeho, in 11 years of standing in rooms just like this one, had learned to recognize on sight. It was the specific look of a being that had just realized it did not know as much as it thought it did. The scanner beeped once, quietly, signaling that the deep archive search had completed. The fifth flag loaded onto the screen. Vreth looked at it. Then he looked at Yuna. Then he looked at the screen again, and his 4 hands went very still on the console, and he did not look away. Behind him, one of the technicians made a sound. A very small, very involuntary sound, the kind that escapes a person before they have a chance to stop it. The rest of the room was still running normally. Aliens continued moving through the hall. Scanners hummed at other platforms. Voices floated and clicked and hummed in a dozen different languages. The ordinary business of a busy registration hall carried on without any awareness of what was happening in this small corner of it. At the main console, Vreth reached out and pressed the button for a secondary confirmation scan. It was something the system reserved for readings that the machine itself wasn't sure it believed. Yuna felt the scan intensity increase slightly, a faint warmth, nothing more, and adjusted her breathing in the way she had been trained to do during long periods of physical stillness. Her eyes stayed forward. Her hands stayed folded. They chuckled while scanning her DNA. The room went silent when Apex Predator appeared on screen. The registration bay of the Galactic Union's central station was a massive place. It was so large that the ceiling could not be seen from the floor. Pale white lights floated at different heights, like slow-moving stars. The air smelled like something between metal and rain. Strange sounds filled the space, clicking, humming, low growling voices, the tap of many different kinds of feet on the polished floor. Hundreds of species moved through the hall, each one waiting their turn at the scanning platforms. Some had 4 arms. Some had no arms at all. Some moved on 6 legs. Some floated without touching the ground. It was the kind of place that made a person feel very small. Yuna walked through the entrance gate with a small bag over her shoulder and a calm look on her face. She was not tall. She was not particularly large. She had short dark hair, quiet brown eyes, and wore a plain gray uniform with the Earth diplomatic patch sewn on the left shoulder. She looked ordinary. That was something people always noticed about her first, how completely, totally ordinary she looked. And then they stopped noticing her at all, which was exactly the way she preferred it. Walking a few steps behind her was Taeho. He was broader in the shoulders, a little taller, and carried himself with the straight-backed posture of someone who had spent years in military service. He was the security attaché assigned to the Earth delegation. He had done this job for 11 years. He had stood in rooms like this one many times before. He had watched the same expressions cross the faces of the same kinds of alien officials. And he had learned long ago to keep his own face very still when it happened. Do-hyun was already inside, waiting near the far wall with a datapad tucked under his arm. He was the diplomatic liaison, the one who handled the paperwork, the translations, the formal language of interspecies relations. He was good at his job because he was patient, and because he knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. When he saw Yuna and Taeho enter, he gave a small nod and said nothing. The scanning platforms stood in a row near the center of the hall. They looked simple enough, circular raised discs of pale gray material, each one surrounded by a ring of scanning equipment that hummed softly when active. Every new arrival to the station was required to step onto one. It was standard procedure. The Galactic Union needed to log every species that passed through its doors. Biology, chemistry, classification, threat level. It was all routine. It had been routine for 300 years. The Valhari delegation was running the scans that day. This was unusual. Normally, the Union's own staff managed registration. But the Valhari had recently joined the Union's administrative board and had been given oversight of the docking level as a gesture of diplomatic welcome. The Valhari were tall creatures, nearly 3 meters from foot to crown, with smooth, pale skin that shifted faintly between gray and blue, depending on the light. They had 4 arms, 2 sets of eyes arranged vertically on their long faces, and voices that came out in layered tones, like 2 people speaking at once. They were considered one of the more intelligent species in the Union. They knew it, and they made sure others knew it too. There were 4 Valhari technicians at the scanning station. The lead one, who the others called Vreth, stood at the main console, with the easy confidence of someone who had never been surprised by anything in a long time. He was reviewing data from the previous scan, a large insectoid creature that had registered as a herbivore, low threat, unremarkable, and he was already bored. Then Yuna stepped up to the platform. Vreth looked at her the way someone looks at a mildly interesting stone on the ground. His upper pair of eyes moved over her quickly. His lower pair didn't even bother. He sent something in Valhari to the technician beside him, a short, clicking phrase, and the technician made a sound that was clearly a laugh. The other 2 joined in quietly, not bothering to lower their voices. Taeho heard it. His jaw tightened slightly. He did not move. Do-hyun heard it too. He looked down at his datapad. Yuna heard it. She stepped onto the platform and stood still, hands folded loosely in front of her. Her expression did not change. The translation device built into the registration hall was not perfect, but it caught the general shape of what Vreth had said. Something about small animals. Something about how the ones that looked the most harmless were usually the most boring. His colleague had responded with something about how humans all looked the same, soft, slow, unimpressive. The laughter had followed naturally from that. It was not the first time. Taeho had heard variations of this in 7 different star systems. He had heard it in formal chambers, and in service corridors, and in places where aliens thought no human could understand their language. He had learned, over 11 years, that there were 2 ways to respond. One way made things complicated. The other way, the quiet way, always worked out better in the end. So he stood still. He watched. He waited. Vreth activated the scanner with a casual wave of one hand. The ring of equipment around the platform came to life. Pale blue light moved slowly up from the floor, passing over Yuna's feet, her legs, her torso, her shoulders. It was a full-body DNA and biological survey, one of the most complete scanning systems the Union had developed. It could read genetic history, evolutionary markers, biological threat classifications, chemical composition, all of it in under 3 minutes. Vreth had run it thousands of times. He already knew what it would say. Humans were on the Union's general registry as a Class 3 species, young, developing, no significant threat markers. He expected the scan to confirm that in about 90 seconds, and then he could move on to the next arrival. One of the other technicians made another remark. This one was about the size of the humans' hands, how small they were, how unsuited for anything requiring real strength. Vreth responded without looking up. More laughter, low and clicking and comfortable. Yuna did not look at them. She looked straight ahead at a fixed point on the far wall. Her breathing was slow and even. She had been told before she left Earth that this might happen. Her supervisor had warned her. Her colleagues had warned her. Even Tejo had mentioned it, briefly, in the transit shuttle on the way over, in the careful way he had of preparing people for things without alarming them. She had nodded and said she understood. And she did understand. She had read the reports. She knew how the Union saw humanity. She knew what box they had put her species in. She knew all of it. She also knew what the scanner was about to find. The blue light reached the top of her head and held there for a moment. The console in front of Vreth began filling with data. Green lines of biological information scrolled steadily across the screen. Vreth glanced at it with half his attention, still talking to his colleague about something else entirely. The machine kept reading, and reading, and reading. Vreth's conversation slowed. Something on the screen had caught one of his lower eyes. He turned toward the console more fully. His colleague noticed the change, and leaned in. The laughter stopped. The scanner was still running. That was the first unusual thing. A standard Class 3 species registered in under 90 seconds. The clock on the console now showed 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and the machine was still pulling data. Vreth had never seen that before with a human. He had never seen that before with most species. His 4 hands moved over the console, checking that everything was running correctly. It was. The scanner was functioning perfectly. It was simply finding more than it expected to find. Much more. Outside the platform ring, Tejo watched Vreth's posture change. It was subtle, a slight stiffening, a shift in the angle of his upper shoulders. Tejo had seen it before, not in Velhari specifically, but in beings who had just encountered something that did not fit neatly into the category they had already decided on. He allowed himself one very small, very quiet breath.